I would like to thank everybody for joining our CPA Present session for this week. My name is Mike Kasoniak, Safety Chair of the Colorado Pilots Association. And with us tonight, we have Dan Bass from Minnesota. And the topic tonight is surviving CO poisoning in the cockpit. If you're unfamiliar with who Mr. Dan Bass is, he survived CO poisoning and crash landed into a field while flying his Mooney on a return trip from Ontario. Dan experienced carbon monoxide poisoning and lost consciousness while airborne. If you hadn't heard this story before, it's a rare and amazing first-person experience. Dan lives in Winona, Minnesota with his wife, Deanna, and 2 children. He owns and operates Mech Pro Manufacturing, a custom equipment manufacturing company. Dan soloed on his 16th birthday and received his private pilot certificate on his 17th birthday. He is currently a CFI with over 2,500 hours. He owns an air coupe and a Mooney M20K. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Thank you for coming on board, Dan, and giving us this presentation of this amazing story. And I will turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thanks. This is the first time I've done any sort of a Zoom webinar type thing. So it's going to be really casual. And I've got a PowerPoint that I've used in the past. I haven't personally really went through it in quite a while, but it has some visuals and stuff. So if I can share that, it would be great.
Offer is a sure thing. So we got former automatic.
Oh, what was that? So do we know how that would work for me to share it?
Marty, you have the controls on that?
I'm ready, Jesse. Download the app. Sign up with the promo code. Bet $1 to get 200 automatically and make it rain with an official sports betting partner of the NFL.
Sponsored in part by Angie, formerly Angie's List. Your home for everything home.
Somebody has their mic on and it's a commercial.
Easier than ever to get your projects done right. Connect with top pros and see ratings and reviews. And when you book and pay your Angie, you're covered by our happiness guarantee.
Can I have everybody mute except for Dan?
And done. Welcome back to Jeopardy.
All right.
And I think you might be able to share now. I said multiple participants can share.
Oh, okay. So I just click share screen.
Try that. See if it works.
President Taft, and it
all right.
became a thing with my friends. I even embroidered a picture of Taft, and it sits in the place of honor in my living room right next to my Alex Trebek candle. Oh, that is the perfect place for that. It sounds like.
Right. Somebody has their TV going in the background.
Researcher from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. People have mistaken you for a famous football player. Is that right?
That's right. Often in the street or in restaurants, people will stop me and tell me how much I look like.
There we go.
Right.
All right. Now, I don't know. Can you guys see me at all?
It happens all the time.
All right. And Matt Amodio, you are a PhD student from New Haven, Connecticut.
Harriet, can you put yours on mute, please?
Tell us about it.
Yeah, I woke up and on the screen door, in the sliding.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so you guys can see my screen, and can you see me? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, down below in the little ones.
Okay, so I got to pay attention to my. Okay, I'm just checking.
Very relatable.
Yeah.
Oh. All right. Well, anyway, my name was a nice introduction. My name is Dan Bass, and as you said, I had an incident with my Mooney back in 2017 in February. So I'll just give you a brief history. It was a really nice little Mooney. It was a C model. This is it pictured departing Oshkosh 1 year ago. Or I mean, not 1 year ago, I should say.
Things you pick, correct.
Looks like we're unmuted again.
One of the greatest songs he's written is Send in the
Harriet, we need you to mute. Thank you.
Okay. Anyway, this picture is coming out of Oshkosh, I think in 2016. So just the Oshkosh before my accident. It was a great airplane for our family. We used it to travel all over the place. So we've had to the Bahamas and the Pacific Northwest several times. These are all separate trips. And we did the Hudson corridor and a New York trip and then in Miami and Key West. It was a really nice equipped for a C model. It was a 69C, had a nice autopilot, an STEC 30. So just a real stable, decent autopilot and a Garmin 530. And it was really well equipped for what it was, especially at the time. So that particular day, I needed to go up to Thunder Bay for work. And I live down here in the southeastern Minnesota. Right here was where the flight originated. And this was basically my flight plan. I was flying IFR from Winona to Thunder Bay. And I took off at about 6:30 in the morning to get so I can get up there in time for my business meetings and then get home. It was, as I mentioned, it was early February. It was about 0 degrees Fahrenheit on the ground. And so I had the airplane plugged in all night and had the cockpit heater and pulled out at 6:30 and took off. Now, early, there was VFR day, but I flew IFR. And climbing up, just out of Winona, I was in the climb down here, and beautiful morning, and something was in my eye and it made me rub my eye. And then I thought to myself, could this be carbon monoxide? Because I had the heater on and everything, but I thought about it. And then I determined that couldn't possibly be carbon monoxide. You don't get something in your eye. And so my eye cleared and everything was fine. And I climbed up to, I think for this first leg, I went up to 10,000. And someplace in that leg, I seem to remember checking my pulse oximeter, because I always do, whenever I fly. And I'd forgotten my oxygen in the hangar this particular morning. Usually I would have it with me. But at 10,000 feet, I didn't normally need it. And I remember checking my pulse ox, and it was a lot higher than it normally would have been. And I just thought that it was great. Like, oh, I'm feeling really good today. So as I climbed up, I cut the corner of the lake a little bit, and I climbed up to 11,000 when I did that, and then flew up to Thunder Bay. Now, when I was about 10 minutes out of Thunder Bay, I started to get a really slight headache. It wasn't bad, but it was there, and it was kind of similar to what I would experience if I didn't have any caffeine. And this particular morning, I didn't have any caffeine. I got up kind of I didn't have enough time to get my coffee fix on. So I assumed I was just getting a caffeine headache. This was a picture I took en route that morning in the climb. So it shows I was about -10 Fahrenheit at that point. And this was something that was new to me too. I hadn't flown, I don't think, when it was this cold outside before, or maybe I had a few times, but I hadn't ever noticed this kind of condensation or this frost that was all over the inside of the windows. Now, my heater kept up with the windscreen, but it didn't on the side windows. Here's where I was cutting across the lake, kind of getting, a little ballsy there. It was really cold. I probably wouldn't have done that ever again. Just another shot when I was heading up. I was having a beautiful flight, and it was a great day. If you're an AOPA member and you're wondering why, you get an ice scraper for the window, which is kind of fun. And this shot was just going in. This looks evening, but it's actually morning. This is going into Thunder Bay, and the sun kind of coming up. And you can see this is the only clouds on the whole trip that I saw on the way up. And all that was kind of heading to the east. And it was just going to be a VFR day with no clouds. So I landed in Thunder Bay. And this is where it got interesting. So the day before, I had called Canadian Customs, and I had arranged when I was going to be there. I filled up my EAPIS the day before, and I'd never flown into Canada before, so I wasn't sure quite what to expect. So I flew in and landed, and it was really cold. I remember getting out of the plane and securing it as quick as I could, and I plugged in the engine heater and some other things, and I sprinted into the FBO building. Now, once I got into the FBO building, I still had that slight headache, but I started to get an anxiety feeling. But that was right after I found out that Thunder Bay actually operates on Eastern time, at least in February. And that I didn't even expect that, because they're actually west of my location. And I mean, as far as Chicago Central time here. So I didn't think of that at all. So when I was choreographing with Canadian Customs, I had told them my arrival time Central time, and they were expecting me on Eastern time. So I was an hour late. And that was outside of the window that I was originally told that I had of plus or minus a half an hour. So once I found this out, I was really nervous. I thought or at least I felt like I was nervous. I had this anxiety feeling, and I assumed that was because of this kind of customs debacle. Everything was fine. They didn't seem to really care, but I wasn't sure how that was going to happen or what was going to happen. So I went about my day there. I went and had some meetings. I was actually late for my meeting because of the time zone mix up. And I went to coffee and went to lunch, had a couple of cups of coffee, and I started feeling quite a bit better. Then in the afternoon, I don't remember the exact time, early afternoon, probably about 4 o'clock. I got ready and did the flight back into the States. So I had to go into Duluth to clear customs. That was the logical first place. So this flight was just about an hour, a little over an hour. And it was, again, that high pressure system had rolled in and it was perfect. And by the time I departed, I had some coffee. I was feeling better. I didn't feel like I had any symptoms of anything. So I made this flight and it was perfect. It was at 6,000 feet. It was absolutely gorgeous. I did a little graphic here, trying to learn PowerPoint. It was just a gorgeous flight. And I love when you get to fly in places where the geographic, what am I saying? When you have the lake and the shore, you can easily look and see where you are on the map or like on a globe. I just love when you can kind of see that. And that the whole flight was just gorgeous. This is coming into Duluth. This is the last photo I took out of the airplane. You can kind of see the line over there is actually the shore of northern Wisconsin. So once I landed in Duluth, I taxied up to the ramp where the customs was. And I think it was right here where this arrow is. And the second I got out of the airplane and stood up on the wing, I got this raging headache. And it was really bad. And it was, of course, it was like 5 degrees out this time. It was really cold. So the customs guy met me at the airplane. He did a quick walk around and we both ran into the FBO to finish the paperwork. So we squared that away, and he said I was good to go. And so I used the restroom and I called my wife and I told her that I'd be home in about an hour. And I had a pretty bad headache and I was looking forward to getting home. So now the whole time I had this headache, it started the second I got out of the airplane. So now leading up to this point, the only symptoms I had were while I was in the airplane was the last 10 minutes or so of the morning flight. The second flight, I didn't have any symptoms and I felt great. Then when I got out of the airplane, of course I didn't. So at this point, it's about 6 o'clock at night. It's dark. Well, it's after 6 now. The sun just went down. It's really cold. I got this headache and it's an easy flight home because of the weather's perfect, except for the cold. And so there probably was a little bit of get home-itis, but I was already starting to be impaired from CO and I didn't really know it. So I told my wife I'd be home in an hour, and I got in the plane and started it. And this was as quick as I could because I didn't want the engine to get cold soaked. Earlier in Thunder Bay, I couldn't start the motor because even though I had it on a heater, it was so cold it just wouldn't start. I had to get a preheat. So I didn't want that to happen. So I started the airplane and got it running. And then I filed my IFR flight plan with my iPad. And then I think I was using Garmin Pilot at the time. And I had to wait until I got a notification on Garmin Pilot that it was in the system. And then I could get my clearance. So I was waiting for that. I knew it usually took 5 to 10 minutes. And while I was doing that, I organized the cockpit. I put my hat, my gloves, and my flashlight in the seat next to me, put my headlamp on. I had my knee board on. I got ready for the clearance, and I kind of went through everything and tidied everything and was ready to go. Then I got notification. I called and got my clearance. And once I got my clearance, I was able to, well, during my clearance, when I listened to the ATC tapes now, I could tell that I was impaired at the time I got my clearance. So I'd already started to slip cognitively. I get my taxi clearance out, and I remember they said taxi to runway 27 via Alpha to Alpha 5, and it was going to be a departure right there. And as I was taxiing out, I remember about this section here, Charlie to runway 3, I got that anxiety feeling again. And it came and it was really intense and it was really short, but it also made my headache go away. So by the time I got to the run-up area, or when I was doing my run-up, I didn't have a headache anymore. That anxiety feeling went away. And I was kind of thinking to myself, what's going on? And I thought I was kind of I didn't know if I was getting sick. I have young kids, and my 4.5-year-old daughter at the time was sick, and I was thinking I was just getting whatever bug she had. But then at this point, when I was doing my run up, I became really focused, too much. So it was really bizarre. So I did my run up, did my flow, and then I got out my checklist. And I remember I ran through my checklist, and then I ran through it again, and then I ran through it again. And I was kind of in this loop where I was running through the checklist, and I wasn't doing anything other than checking everything. And the tower called me and said, 49 Victor, are you ready to go? And that sort of snapped me out of it. And the ATC type said, I will be in a minute. And then about 30 seconds later, he just cleared me for takeoff. And I just sort of went along with it. I was like, okay, cleared for takeoff. And at this point, I was really impaired and didn't know what was going on. I couldn't put any of the pieces together. And I was very suggestible. If the tower would have said, hey, why don't you shut down there and walk back to the ramp, I would have did that. Or if he said, why don't you go do jumping jacks, I would have did that. I had no idea, what was going on. And he said cleared for takeoff, runway 27. He gave me a heading to turn to. And so I taxied out and took off. And once I was positive rate, I was putting the landing gear up. And when I put the landing gear up and I had my hand on the gear handle, that anxiety feeling came back really strong again. Again, it only lasted 10 to 15 seconds. And then it went away. And I was just thinking, what is going on? And I turned to the heading, and I remember flipping the autopilot on, and that autopilot just had altitude hold. It didn't have I couldn't adjust, a climb speed or anything, but so it didn't have pre-select. So I'm climbing trimmed for about 105 knots, 120 miles an hour in that airplane. And then turn the autopilot on to track the heading. So I've got the heading bug dialed in, I think 240. My ground track showed something a little different than that, so I might not have said it right. And then there was a couple handoffs. There's a couple radio transmissions back and forth, traffic call outs. And I remember kind of slurring those. And when I listened to ATC tapes, I was really slurring them. And I started thinking I probably need to go land. I remember hovering my thumb over the autopilot disconnect button and wanting to tell ATC I got to come back and land. But I was just kind of going with the motions, and they said cleared. Well, they did a handoff, and I missed the handoff. I stayed on tower, which isn't, we all do it once in a while. But then when I went over to departure, I was slurring even worse. He cleared me direct to Winona and up to 9,000 feet. I repeated that. I kind of remember going, putting in the GPS and going direct, enter. And then I usually hit my GPS steer button. And that was the last thing I remembered. The next thing I remember is I was waking up. And when I was waking up, everything was kind of dreamlike. And I just assumed I dozed off, and I needed to call ATC and tell them I had to land. So I started keying the mic, was trying to talk to ATC. Nobody was responding. And then I was looking forward, and I noticed that my windscreen was nice and clear. And since I own this airplane, that was always a battle, trying to keep it as clean as possible. There's a lot of bugs where we live in the river valley, and in the summer, it's just brutal. You got to clean it every flight. And I was just kind of admiring it, thinking, wow, that looks really good. And I reached my hand forward and then realized it was missing. And that's when I realized I was on the ground. So where I actually went was over here. So I took off and turned to that heading, or at least the heading. I don't know if I had my DG set quite right, because there was virtually no wind. That isn't quite 240. But at any rate, I took off, turned to the heading, and then at about 4,300 to 4,500 feet is where I lost consciousness. The airplane continued to climb on its own until it got up to about 12,500 feet, at which case, fortunately, I was full rich mixture. So the airplane couldn't produce any more power, and it just kind of loitered along at 105 knots for an hour and a half is what we figure. Now, during all that, I missed a whole bunch of fun stuff. So ATC tried to contact me dozens and dozens of times. Lots of airliners tried to relay to me. There was lots of people involved. In fact, when I did come to and I got my phone back, I had 6 text messages from ATC, and I think I had 7 voicemails from ATC, all different controllers trying to get in touch with me. And then when I got to, as I was loitering along, unresponsive, coming towards Minneapolis here, St. Paul, they did scramble 2 F-16s from Madison, Wisconsin. And by the time they got to me, I was already on the south side of the cities. So I wasn't really a threat to the metropolitan area. And from what I've been told is they did a couple circles. One of them formed up and tried to look in my window, and they said they couldn't do anything. And then they went back to Madison. So like I said, unfortunately, that was the only time I've ever flown formation with F-16s. And here I was asleep. And then the airplane ran out of gas just right down here by the Owatonna airport, or right here's Owatonna. And I was at about 12,500 feet, and then it just descended then down at 105 knots. So I climbed at 105, cruised at 105, and descended at 105. And it just so happens I landed in a field. And a lot of people say I landed, and which I still say I crashed. You can see the airplane is pretty banged up. Moonies are pretty stout. I ended up having quite a few injuries, but I woke up in this, and I was looking really confused. I was looking around, and off of this wing, off my right wing, way off into a field, I saw a searchlight, and I knew right away that they were looking for me. I just assumed, because I was talking to ATC, that there would be search and rescue underway. I had no idea where I was. But my first thought was a friend of mine who had crashed at night in an Archer, and he crashed short of an airport, and he called 911, and they were able to come out to the airport, but they couldn't see him. He was about a half mile, 3/4 of a mile off field. And then he turned on all the lights on the airplane, and some of them worked. And then they were able to come and find him. So that's what I thought right away. I got to light up the airplane. So I started trying to flip on switches, and nothing was working. My switch panel for the lights was missing. It was sunk into the panel, kind of jammed. Then I had an overhead light that was one of those old rotary switches that you'd find in old lamps and stoves and things. And you could turn it, if you turn it one way, it didn't work, and the other way it worked. And the way it works takes more resistance. And at this time, now I've been unconscious in an airplane for at least a half an hour, and it's 5 degrees out, and I didn't have gloves. I didn't have any strength in my hands to turn it the correct way. I could turn it the wrong way. So I knew that wasn't happening. So I thought, well, I'll grab my flashlight or my headlamp or my phone, and I couldn't find anything. So my headlamp was gone. It wasn't on my head anymore. I couldn't find it on the floor. My flashlight was gone. I couldn't find that. And then my phone I did find, but it was had an error message on it, and I remember just being frustrated, and I threw it. And then I did find, this shows how I was still really cognitively impaired. I did find my iPad. It was still working, and I wanted to know if I was in Iowa or Minnesota, and I got it up, and Garmin Pilot was working, and I looked at it and I said, oh, I'm in Minnesota. And then I threw that aside too. I could have used that maybe to signal, and I just didn't think of it. So I then try to get out of the plane, and I can't move my legs at all. I couldn't move my knees. I looked down at them and couldn't wiggle them at all. So I assumed I was paralyzed, and it didn't bother me at all. I just kind of thought that's what happens in a plane crash. And part of me being so impaired, it didn't faze me. So I was trying to figure out what's the next step. And then I was thinking about a movie, and how in the movies, when you're paralyzed, they always ask, can you wiggle your feet or your toes? And then if someone wiggles their toes, they assume they're fine. So I started thinking about that, and I started concentrating and tried to wiggle my toes in my boots, and I could. So then I realized I wasn't paralyzed. And I started examining the situation more, and my feet were stuck underneath the rudder pedals, and then the rudder pedals would collapse on them. So I was pinned. And so I started fiddling with that, and I got my right leg out, and my left leg was pinned pretty bad. So it took a bit of monkeying around to get that out. And then I kind of crawled out onto the wing of the airplane and stood up. And now, before the flight, my wife made sure I brought a pair of my Carhartt bib overalls. So I had my Carhartt jacket with, and I wasn't wearing it in the plane because it's so bulky. So that was in the back seat. And then also in the back seat, I had my Carhartt bib overalls. And my wife said, bring those along. If you have a forced landing, you can slip those things on and you can hike out. And interesting, as I was remembering that flight into Duluth, looking out my window, and there was a couple lakes inland that weren't Superior. And I was looking at those. I'm like, okay, that's where I'm going to go if the engine quits now. And I'm like, I'll hike over there. You know, I was kind of thinking about it. So I get out on the wing and I think I got to put these Carhartt bib overalls on. So I get them out and I lay down on the plane and or on the wing and I try to put them on. And I was fooling around with that for what seemed like a long time. I couldn't get my feet in and they were tangling up on me. And at this point I'm injured and I'm confused. So I just wasn't able to do it. So I got my car jacket out and slipped that on and I couldn't zip it up. It was, my fingers just didn't have the dexterity. So, and then I kind of went back in the plane, looked for my hat, looked for my gloves, looked for anything, and I couldn't find anything. So I turned and I set off into that field. We'll see if I got some pictures here just to show you. So this is what I woke up to. This is taken just a few hours later by the sheriff. So the airplane held together pretty well. So this is my flight path coming in and where I came to rest. And this is the field. This is about the ground impact. Well, actually, it's a little longer. But so my plane came parked right up here and it was facing this direction. So that light I saw was way north. So I set off in the field this way, thinking I was going towards the light. And really I was walking towards, you know, or away from anything. I couldn't see the road. I couldn't see anything. And as I would walk, I would take a few steps and fall down and I'd crawl a little bit and I'd try to stand up again and I'd fall down again. And then when I'd fall backwards, I remember cursing because I wasn't going in the right direction and I had to go over, do that part over again. So I walked off in the field. I figured to about right in this area, which is the low point in the field, which is also what I learned later about where the first impact was. It was only about a 300 foot from impact to stop was about 300 feet. So I walked down there and meanwhile, this whole time sitting in the cockpit and then getting out, there was a helicopter that was flying back and forth and they were flying north to south is my memory. And they started way over here or way over to the west and they were getting closer and closer. Now, at this point, I fell down and I kind of rolled over and I was tired and I started to get warm and I was starting to feel comfortable and I just didn't want to go anymore. And the helicopter came cruising right over the top of me. I yelled and screamed and waved and it's pitch black out, you know, there's no moon at all this night. So they didn't see me. And I was just getting comfortable and I thought, this is fine. If I die, I die. If they find me, they find me, but I don't have to go anymore. And then while I was laying there looking up at the stars, right above us was or above me was the Pleiades constellation or star cluster, they call it, I guess. And I've always loved that little constellation of stars growing up. And when we were having my second daughter, this was just 3 years before, I was loading my wife in the car at midnight saying, let's go to the hospital. We're gonna have this baby. She was in labor. And my wife paused and said, we don't have a name for her yet. What are we gonna name her? And one of the names we were considering was Maya, after a star in the Pleiades star cluster. And I looked up with my wife and I'm like, there's Pleiades, let's name her Maya. So that's what we named her. And so as I'm laying in this field, I'm looking up right at Pleiades. And then that moment snapped into my mind. And up until this point, I hadn't thought one iota about who I was. So I didn't know anything. I didn't know my name. I didn't know anything at this point. I wasn't thinking about my life at all. So that just made me realize my entire life, what was going on. And then I was laying there and I thought, well, if I lay here, I'm going to die. Probably. The helicopter didn't see me. I'm getting warm. It's really cold out. I'm not bundled up at all. And then I thought, but if I get up and I go to help, if I try to get help and it hurts and it's painful and it's not easy and I still die, that short bit of pain and hurt and everything really doesn't mean anything. It's not really a sacrifice, you know? So I thought I got to get up and get to help. And that was really cool. I tell people that was the neatest part for me of this whole accident because it was the first time in my adult life that I only had one thing to do. I didn't have to worry about anything. I didn't have to worry about, getting someplace on time. I didn't have to worry about paying bills. I didn't have to worry about anything. I just had to get up and get to help. And that was a really neat part of this whole experience. And then fortunately, the longer time has elapsed from my exposure to the CO, the more energy I was getting, the more cognitive ability I was getting, and adrenaline was really working its magic, and I was able to walk further without falling. I was able to kind of have my wits about me more. So as I was laying there, I decided to get help. I had to get to help. I was looking for something. I hadn't seen that light off to the north anymore, and I was looking around the whole scene. And up until this point, when I got out of the airplane, I looked this way and I walked this way. I never once looked back. And so as I'm laying there, I'm looking back, and this house here had a big yard light right here, which I could see through the trees. So I thought that's the closest thing to me, so I got to get there. And at the point, the house is here, and I could only see the garage and this outbuilding. So I didn't know if there was a house there or not, but I thought that's my best shot. So my memory was that I walked directly back, but after I've visited, since I've been there, I walked to the plane and then I walked over. I'm not quite sure why, but as I walked up to the plane, I remember tapping on the stabilizer, because at this point I knew what was going on, and I tapped on it and I thanked it out loud, for taking care of me. And then I turned and I went through these woods to this house here. As I got into the edge of the woods right here, I got all tangled up in some brush, and it took a little bit to figure it out, but I was caught on a barbed wire fence. Unfortunately, I still had my Carhartt jacket on, which is like body armor. So I didn't feel it. I didn't get cut up or anything, but I was kind of stuck on this barbed wire fence. And so I crawled underneath it and then made my way tree to tree, and I'd fall some. The problem with the tree area was there was quite a bit of snow. There wasn't really any snow in the field. There was snow, but it was hard packed and it was really windswept. So it was fairly easy to walk. And in the woods here, there was a lot of snow. It was probably, I wouldn't say a lot, but there's 10 inches of snow, and I kept falling down and I was crawling. And at that point, my hands were just bricks. I couldn't differentiate fingers or anything. I couldn't move them. And I was getting really angry because I thought I might live and then I'm not going to have hands anymore. And that just terrified me. But so I made my way up to this house, and or this garage, I came up the side and I could see the light of the house. And on the back, there was a flicker of the TV in the window. And this was glare ice. And somehow, this is about 75 feet. I walked across it and I didn't fall at all. So I was gaining, motor skills as I went on. And I got to the house, and there was a woman there watching TV, and I scared her to death. Her husband was retired, and he was out as a side gig. He was driving school bus for the girls' volleyball team, I think he said. And so he wasn't there. She was home alone, and here someone's pounding on her back patio, kind of face bloodied up. But once I got inside, she was able to call the authorities, and it only took probably 2 minutes, and sheriff's deputy had pulled in. And at this point, I walked in and I had her call my wife. I remembered my wife's phone number, and pilots would think this part's kind of funny. So she called my wife and said, I'm here with your husband. He's okay. He was in a plane crash. And at this point, I'm 2.5, 3 hours late from being home. And my wife thought I was just at the hangar talking to somebody. Like she did not expect me back, just because she's so used to me just getting stuck at the airport. So Cynthia talked to my wife and kind of updated her. The sheriff came in, and just a few minutes after him, paramedics showed up. They put me in the ambulance. They put me in a stretcher, threw me in the ambulance, drove me right here out this little path, because right here is where the helicopter landed then. And they loaded me in the helicopter and then flew me, fortunately, to the Mayo Clinic. I was real close to the Mayo Clinic. So this was the very next day. My brother went out right before anyone touched the airplane. You'd see my car bib overalls and wings still. I did open up the luggage compartment to try to get stuff, and I couldn't find anything in there either. The airplane did a remarkable job. Impacting the ground at 105 knots is still moving pretty good. And that steel cage that the Moonies have, and then I think even more importantly, the full spar that runs over, did a great job holding this thing together. And you can kind of see it in there. This airplane has shoulder harnesses. Now, it didn't originally from the factory, but those were added. And they definitely saved my life. I had a diagonal bruise across my chest for a month. So that was, I highly recommend that. this is my clear windshield that I got to look out of. And all of this condensation is actually frost from my breath from when I was passed out there. And it turns out what I believe that condensation in the morning that was inside the windows was condensation from the exhaust. This is the inside. It's doesn't look too bad, but Wentworth got their money out of it, I think, but it was pretty shot. So then I'll try to just zip through this. This is kind of the, the academics on what is carbon monoxide. And a lot of people know more about it than I do. But as you know, it's a byproduct of combustion, and it happens, it's odorless and tasteless and colorless and all that, which is true. It attaches to the hemoglobin in your blood. And what it does, it's something like a couple hundred times stronger. It's just 200 times stronger than oxygen. So once the CO grabs on, there's no room for the oxygen. So that hemoglobin can't carry oxygen, and off it goes, and the next one and the next one. And if you have oxygen and carbon monoxide almost always beats it out because of it's such a strong bond. So it's actually a forced hypoxia is what you experience. So it deprives your body oxygen. And then because of the strong bond, so it doesn't take a lot of CO to cause problems because it beats out oxygen. So you can raise your amounts. Now, this is a typical stuff we would see going through FAA training, whether it be your private or go through your CFI or whatever. It always kind of comes up, and they'll say stuff. They'll give us, in fact, these are both FAA charts. And this sort of, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. It sort of leads to my demise because I read these and I see, up to 10, there's none. This is a percent in the blood. From 10 to 20, you have a slight headache. From 21 to 30, you have a headache and increased respirations, et cetera, and it gets worse. And so I always assumed that I didn't have a carbon monoxide detector, and I assumed that I would know it's winter, I got my heater on, I'm going to start getting a headache, and I assumed that all these symptoms would be linear and would progressively get worse. And then it turns out, for me, most of them didn't happen in the airplane. 2, they would come and go, especially at the end there when it got bad. That anxiety would come and it would go, and the headache would come and go, and it didn't make sense. So I had no idea. And the other thing is when you start to get symptoms, your cognitive ability starts going way down. So it's harder to put the pieces together and take action and know really what's going on. The other thing that's interesting, I'll just leave this chart up for a sec, was I study a lot of CO accidents after mine. And this, the majority of fatals that I can find are all in this ballpark. You say way up here, it's like pounding, headache, confused. Well, this is what I was experiencing. But according to FAA, their guess is I was around 30%. So it's much worse than what this even makes it out to be. So the symptoms are similar to hypoxia because it is a forced hypoxia. So they're going to be unique to every person, just like hypoxia isn't the same for everybody. What I learned, that the big takeaway, symptoms aren't linear. They don't get worse necessarily. They come and they go. And then what happened to me, it's easy to justify all the symptoms. So I had the lack of caffeine first. I had the anxiety that I attributed to one of them. And then my daughter being sick. So it's really easy to just kind of justify how you're feeling. And then by the time you're experiencing symptoms, especially to a dangerous level, your cognitive ability isn't there anymore to really take action. So, and then how does it get in the cabin? This is interesting. Obviously, most of us know how the mufflers work, and I won't, or how the heaters work, and I won't go over that too much. But anytime you have an internal combustion engine in front of you with the airplanes, you can get CO in the cabin. So we often think that the muffler is the number one way in, and I think it is. But what I found with all the previous accidents is there isn't a geographical or a seasonal time that has more CO accidents than any other. So if you're in South Florida in the summer flying a Cub, or if you're flying in Alaska, the likelihood of it happening is all the same. So it's really important to try to protect either way. And it can get in like through the heater is a really easy way, but also it gets in wheel wells and And if you have an exhaust leak, it could get in rudder pedal, boots, all sorts of different ways into the cabin. And then of course the piston twins, there's been accidents with those with their gas heater. So that's something to think about too. Let's see. So it's like I was saying, it's not just a winter problem or northern climate. It happens everywhere. And only half of them were because of the heating system, is what I'd found, which is pretty interesting. So this is my muffler. It's pretty banged up, but right in the very middle, I had a crack. Now, the flight before this day, I took my family out for ice cream, which is weird in the winter, but there's nothing else to do. So we went down to this little airport called Rushford to get ice cream. And when we were starting to leave, when I started the motor, it backfired. And this airplane, I've only experienced maybe 3 backfires. And this was the first time my wife has ever experienced one. And she right away jumped and she goes, "What was that?" And I said, "Well, it was a backfire." Those of you that are critical, it's an after fire. Some people tell me it's not really a backfire, that's forward. But at any rate, and I told her it was no big deal. And we took off and came home. Well, if I didn't have a crack, that most definitely put it there. If I did have a small crack, it made it worse. I don't really know. But the muffler itself had about 750 hours or 790 hours on or something. And so the exhaust system was actually in pretty good repair anyway. And about 80 hours before we did the annual, and we did inspect it, pressure checked it, and there was no leaks then. So it happened sometime after that. So what can we do to protect ourselves? You could dumb luck. That's what I did. That's what I used to use. Didn't work real good. Well, it did work good, but kind of. Good aircraft maintenance obviously is important. And then most importantly, you need CO detectors. And as a CFI, many times I'd fly with people that had these things and they never, you'd see this date opened or the expiration date or whatever. And I'd be flying with guys that have these in their planes that are 8 years old, and they're not doing anything. And even if they are up to date and they're going, by the time this dot changes color or it changes, into the danger or, caution or danger level, you're already getting, impaired cognitively, and you got to look over at this and figure out what it means and what you've seen. See what else I got. There's the home detectors. A lot of people use the home detectors, which is far better than those other ones. It probably would have caught my deal, but they're made to this UL standard. And the problem is with that is to avoid false positives, to avoid police calls or fire calls, and people always go into houses. They're set that at minimum, they got at 70 plus parts per minute, it's supposed to go off in 60 minutes to 240 minutes. So in an airplane environment, they might not be that great, because if you're sitting at say 240 parts per million or whatever, you're sitting at 70 parts per million for 200 minutes, and then you take a break and then you go again and you take a break. Theoretically, you could kind of ratchet up your level and these wouldn't catch it. But what I recommend are these high resolution detectors. What's great about those, they give you a PP parts per million real time. Most of them are right down to 0, and they're pretty accurate. And they'll have visual alarms, they'll beep, and some vibrate. And what's great about them is they're sensitive enough to give immediate feedback on what's going on in the cockpit. So a UL or a home detector isn't going to do this for you. I'll check my heating system before I take off now, and if I see any rise on my CO detector, as small as it could be, I can address the problem right away. And that might be 15 or 20 or 50 hours before there'd be a real emergency, but it means I can do it on my own schedule at my own shop, and everything's better. So you catch these problems way earlier, and then it's just more convenient for the maintenance side of things. Then there's also the panel mount detectors, which are also great because they're always in the plane, they're always on. A lot of them you can run into your audio panel. I have this one here, and it goes into the audio panel. And some of them do give you a level of display. And I really recommend to have 2 different types of detectors. They double check each other. And then, like, the panel mounts are great for a fail safe, like you have a problem when those go off, but then a portable just to stay ahead of maintenance. And pulse oximeters, anyone, you guys are Colorado pilots, so you're probably more familiar with these than most of the Midwestern pilots. But I got one of these a few years ago, and after the first flight I took with it, I bought a portable oxygen system because I couldn't believe how low some of my sats got at just 10 or 11,000 feet. But what they don't do is detect CO, because that hemoglobin bonds to the oxygen. These things, my understanding is they look at the color of the blood, and it basically looks like you're more oxygen saturated. So if you're reading 98 and you're at 11,000 feet without supplemental oxygen, you probably got CO. And that's probably kind of what I was seeing. Here's just a quick shot after I got another Mooney, and I just went and flew over the field I ended up in. So I came in right over here and then hit here and kind of ended up right over here. It's kind of fun to fly over. This is looking, I would have came in right over these trees and impacted right in this low spot. I guess actually right over, not the trees, this power line. It came in, impacted low spot and sat up over here. This is looking the other direction. I would have cleared these trees and barn by just 100 feet maybe, and just barely cleared the power line. So I mean, it's at the speed I was traveling, 1 second, if my engine quit 1 second earlier, I maybe would have hit the ditch or any of this stuff. 1 second later, I would have been into the woods. It's pretty fascinating. So this is don't ignore the cat. This is my daughter. I just took this picture. This is looking out at the field I ended up in from the woods, and it shows the elevation change. That's why I threw it in there. It wasn't a flat field. Like if I had my engine failure in the daytime, this wouldn't have been a field I would have chosen if I had my choice. So just unbelievable luck to get in there. This is Cynthia Crabtree. This is the window I knocked on, and then I came up through this back door and went in, which is pretty neat. So yeah, that's pretty much it. If anyone wants to do questions or.
Hey, Dan, this is Michael. I have a question for you. In fact, I had written it down even before you brought it up about the seatbelt. When you bought the aircraft, did you immediately put in a shoulder harness, or was that something?
The previous owner did. The previous owner did. Yeah.
Okay.
And now I won't fly in an airplane without them. It's just crazy.
Okay. Yeah. And you said the snow depth in the field, it was pretty much hard pack. Did that help? If the snow had been softer, or
with the actual accident, the airplane,
yeah.
I don't think it would have made much of a difference. I hit pretty hard. I think it probably would have been the same either way. I mean, if I had a couple feet of snow, maybe it would have been different. But I think the circumstances, it worked out pretty well because I was able to maneuver outside of the airplane easier.
Yeah. And did you spend any time in the hospital, or how bad were your injuries?
Yeah, so I ended up breaking a couple vertebrae in my back. I broke my upper jaw. I knocked out a bunch of teeth, and that was bent and shoved back in my mouth. I had some puncture wounds in the knees, and my hands were frostbitten really quite bad. So I was in the hospital for 5 days, I believe. And it was kind of interesting because, the adrenaline, you get so amped up. And so I walked in and then into her house, and I sat there for a little while, and they got me off to the hospital, and I felt like $1 million. It was, well, I suppose I don't know if I would have had any drugs at the time. I don't think they put me on anything yet. And this was on a Thursday night, and I immediately assumed I would be at work on Monday. And I was kind of thinking all the stuff I have to do. And on Monday, they wouldn't let me out of the hospital because I couldn't stand up. So, I mean, it's just your body goes through that ringer, and it just takes a little while to kind of snap back. And then fortunately, so when they whisked me off to the hospital, and when I was in the ICU, they didn't know why I lost consciousness. And it's not standard procedure just to test people for CO poisoning when you come in, apparently. So they ran EKGs, and they did a full body CAT scan, and they did all this stuff. And they kept asking me, why did you pass out? What did you do today? And they were looking at everything. And I said, I don't know. And then finally, this nurse practitioner, she was amazing. She was the best doctor I had. And, but she's like, we have to know why. And I said, well, did you check for CO? and she drew blood and they ran off, and they came back 10 minutes later and they said, yeah, that's what it is. And fortunately, one of the other doctors in the ICU does a rotation in the hyperbaric chamber, and she said, we got to get you in there right away. And so then they put me in the Mayo's hyperbaric chamber, and I went through 3 treatments there, and which was good for CO. I haven't had any long-term effects from the CO poisoning. But my hands and my feeling in my hands came back really well. They're not 100%, but they're really good. And most of the doctors told me I wouldn't have any feeling in my fingers again. So I think hyperbaric helped that, but that was just coincidental.
Yeah. Oh God. Well, I'm glad you're doing well today.
Yeah, thanks.
How long after like the accident happened in February? How long after that did you go back and visit the scene and take those pictures?
That would have been, I think that was later in the fall of 2017.
2017.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when I still had my back brace on and I had a cane, I think I still had a walker. So just probably a week or 2 after the accident, I went up to Wentworth Aircraft storage hangar at Air Lake in Minnesota and looked at my airplane, and I wanted to get some things out of it. And Steve Wentworth met me out there, and he said, yeah, I was going to send somebody out, but I found out it was you. He's like, I've never had someone come and want to see their airplane before. So it was pretty surreal to see that. They cut the wings off it, and I went in there and kind of collected some of the stuff I okayed with the insurance company to get out of the airplane.
Now, from one of the aerial photos that you showed us, was there a little pond to the right?
Yeah, just south. It's a little lake, actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
if I would have went another few seconds, I would have been over by that lake, which was
Okay.
frozen solid. That if my airplane could have landed in the lake or on the ice,
Yeah.
that would have worked out good because there's a lot of houses around there. But I wouldn't have wanted to take that chance. Pretty
Right.
steep shore and everything.
Yeah. Oh gosh. All right. Any other questions for Dan from our membership?
Yeah, Dan, it's Laura here. You answered my question. I used to be a hyperbaric chamber nurse in Denver and at Hennepin. So I was curious if you had gone to the chamber, which you said you did. And I was wondering, did they tell you what your CO level was when they drew the labs?
Oh yeah, they did. Well, during the lab, it was only 13.2% or something like that. But that was about 5 hours after the crash. And they say with CO, 4 to 5 hours is the half-life. And that's under normal oxygen. And I was on supplemental oxygen from the second they put me in the helicopter till they pull the labs. So they estimated I was around 30% at the time that I woke up anyway.
Yikes.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely the hyperbaric helped the sensation in your fingers, definitely.
Yeah, it's an incredible treatment. I'm hoping it gets, it's more used with other things in medical world, because it seems to help a lot.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
This is Gary Toby. Obviously you hit pretty hard, but I mean, only 300 feet doesn't, it sounds like you were coming down at a pretty good rate. What were your injuries? Were those basically crushing injuries, or did your head snap forward?
Well, my head did go forward some because the broken jaw and my teeth and everything, that I believe was my iPad mount and the iPad on the yoke, because I had it mounted on the yoke. And the iPad was bent, but it still worked, which is interesting. But then, yeah, my spine, three vertebrae were crushing injuries from hitting pretty hard. So, and I was coming down. Flightaware had me at about 1,200 feet a minute most of the way down. That same ground speed of 105 knots. And I think now, the investigators still did everything, which we kind of knew what happened right away. But a guy from Lycoming got a hold of the carburetor, and they said there was a little bit of fuel in the carburetor still. So I was running off. This is kind of funny. This is my actual knee board that I had. It's that thick aluminum. It's all bent up. And on here I have my clearance and my fuel. So I took off on the right tank with 22 gallons, and I burned through that till it was empty and came down. I had 16 in my left. And the way down, the guy from Lycoming assumed that the airplane was just porpoising a little bit, and the engine would come to life and then die and come to life and die, is what he thought. And so it's another one of those, the way it hit a dip in the field and the way it was angled, I think it hit just right. So another half a second or second further, the field was upsloping, and I assume that impact would have been so severe at that point, I probably wouldn't have been able to survive. Like I said, I couldn't do it in the daytime.
No.
And as a
Yeah.
CFI for years, I've been telling students that, you know, over control the airplane. I said, remember, the airplane flies better than you do. And here I'm living proof now. Just
And did you have the world famous Mooney wing leveler going or not?
no, well, I had an S-Tech 30 autopilot, and I had it on
Okay.
tracking heading, so it was doing it was wing level for me.
Oh, okay. So you had an autopilot, so that brought it down in some semblance of
Right,
normal.
it kept the wings level, and that S-Tech was always rock solid for me, so it did its job. This happened to another gentleman 20 years before me in Omaha, and a doctor in a Comanche 400, and he had I believe a Century 2000 autopilot with auto trim, and so he passed out in cruise, and the airplane ran out of gas, and then the auto trim kicked in, and it tried to hold altitude by just trimming up and trimming up, and it got full up trim and it clicked off, and he came down at 60 knots and landed in a field perfect. So I wasn't so lucky.
Yeah, I don't know how we ever detect other people. At least one friend of mine one time got out of his airplane. He was wobbly, out on the ramp, and we immediately said, "Oh, you got CO," because he was
Yeah.
goopy. But
Yeah, and
he made it in and landed and taxied in, but he was about half goopy, and we immediately recognized what it was. And it's interesting because with time, CO goes away, but it takes hours.
It takes hours, yeah, and lots of people have relayed their stories to me, and I heard of one that was in a Cessna 150, a student pilot and a CFI, and the student pilot started getting sick and said, "I want to go back," and the CFI said, "Okay, fine." And then in the downwind, the CFI was getting pretty sick, and they flared, touched down, and they both passed out, and they went off the edge of the runway. And so, I mean, it's crazy.
That was a question I had, Marty Brophy. The Moonies are sort of notoriously nose heavy. So I guess the wing level that Gary was talking about would have played a role in this, but I was amazed that you didn't just like nose down. Obviously the gear was up.
The gear was up. Well, there's a couple.
How did you not like just sort of fly right into that upslope? And
I mean, luck mainly, but no, the Moonies. So I instruct in Moonies too, so I've got time in every Moonie up to the brand new ones, and the short bodies, the C's and the E's and the B's and all the short body Moonies, they're not nearly as nose heavy as the others. So and then I had it trimmed, remember, for that climb of 105 knots. And then basically the only thing changed the whole flight was my power. As I climbed, I had less and less power, and I got to a point where it was just equilibrium and I was just cruising along. And then when I ran out of fuel, it just came down to 105 knots. So if I had lost consciousness in cruise, that autopilot just had an altitude hold, and I would have been trimmed for much higher airspeed, or it didn't have auto trim, but I would have been trimmed for much higher airspeed, and then I would have came down at that airspeed, and it wouldn't have been survivable. So I was fortunate it happened early and happened in the climb. And it happened just at the right time too. The doctors had all said, another half an hour of exposure, for sure I would have been dead, but maybe even as 10 or 15 minutes, I would have been dead. I was real close when the engine ran out of fuel. So the timing worked out perfect. So from start to finish, I was unconscious for about 2 hours.
Wow. Yeah, I was talking about an M20K, which I've got a few hundred hours in. So that was my point of reference.
Yeah, that's what I have now.
Why didn't the ELT, why did they have so much trouble finding?
Oh, well, I had a 121.5 ELT, but not a 406. And the helicopter that was flying over was actually a medevac helicopter. It wasn't a search and rescue. And so I don't think they were totally equipped. They couldn't track an ELT. They could hear me. They didn't have any, I don't think they had any night vision or anything like that. And it just happened to be, my understanding was they were en route. They had just refueled and were en route to wherever their standby base is. And ATC told them, we got an unresponsive airplane, looks like it's going down. And they volunteered to come and look. So they just turned and headed my direction. So it was just by chance that they were in the air looking for me.
Well, you commented on the Mooney cage, which we've all hoped would hold up under the circumstances. But the other thing is you had 16 gallons in the left tank, and that must have held together. Must be that fuel tank held together, that wing.
Well, we don't really know. So that's another thing. There's like a lot of miracles, right?
Yeah.
Fortunately, it was so cold, the fuel is not real volatile when it's that
Yeah.
cold. But the FAA swears that everything was empty. They said there wasn't any fuel, and they said there was no staining. And I talked to the investigator that was there, and he said, no, that thing was bone dry. There wasn't any fuel in the plane, which I know. I stick the tanks and everything. There was 16 gallons. I would never take off with just 22 in one tank. But a friend of mine who recovers airplanes and salvages them, he said he's often seen debris stick the fuel sump open and have the fuel drain slowly straight down and into the ground. So I'm thinking that, there wasn't blue staining around the wing and he didn't get under and look, but yeah, fortunately there's no fire. But that's kind of a function of winter flying. That's one of the good parts of flying in the winter.
Yeah, you got to fly at 5 degrees to keep that going.
Right.
Well, you're a very lucky man. Glad
am.
you're able to tell us the story.
Yeah, thank you. The other takeaway I had is the idea of survival equipment. I talked about how the airplane, I couldn't find anything in the airplane at all. And so now I fly with a flight vest, and in the flight vest, I'll have, what I need for that flight. I always have my cell phone in there for communication. My handheld radio that I used to carry with me, I didn't bring anymore because the battery didn't work. And I always thought to myself, well, that thing is a pain. It doesn't work that well. It's an old ICOM A20. I'm like, if I lose my comms, they're never going to be able to hear me. When in reality, a handheld radio is for after the accident. It's really not for a comm failure. It's for when you're on the ground and you can dial up 125 and talk to an airliner and tell them where you are. The other thing is I have a PLB, which I used to carry a PLB, and then it expired, and I bought that for the Bahamas trip, and it expired and I never got another one. And that particular one had a strobe on it. So I could have just held that out my little side window, had the 406 going, and the helicopter would have saw me. So now I have that. I have a flashlight that's affixed to my flight vest that's got a strobe. I have the handheld radio bolted to next to my leg. So I have everything I need for communication right next to me. And I think that's more important when people talk about crash kits or they talk about surviving a crash. They always get into the backpack, the camping gear, what you need. And reality is, for most of us, Colorado's a little different. You guys could be stuck for a few days, I suppose. But especially in the Midwest, all you need to do is be able to get a hold of somebody. I had hundreds of people out looking for me, that just wanted to find me. And all I had to do is get a hold of someone. And that was the important part. So all the camping gear and all that is well and good, but I think communication is key, and have as many communication devices as possible, and then have them attached to you or really close. So when the airplane decides to go crazy, you can find them.
Yeah, I've been in Civil Air Patrol many years, and basically we have that little backpack. But most of us, and I'm also an old Navy pilot, you have it in your vest. You've got to have that survival vest on you. So if you're still alive, you might be able to reach it. And even if you just got one hand, there's things that some of us have had to think about in time. But you got to be serious about surviving the crash.
Right.
Well, was the Civil Air Patrol out looking for you? Do you know?
No, they didn't have time yet. They didn't scramble because
Okay.
it was
All right.
it was 8 o'clock at night. And so I was found within an hour and a half from crashing.
Sure. Well, the one thing about that is that they do have direction finding gear, and the
Right.
aircraft have great direction finding. They find you right away, but as you say, you got to know. You gotta have a launch and get there and to look at the area.
Yeah, like they're probably at home having supper, and they get the phone call and they got to clean up and go to the airport and pull the plane out, and yeah, it'd take a while.
Well, maybe or maybe not, but I will say that the other thing that Civil Air Patrol has is basically the best radar detection of where did you hit. in recent years, we've been going and finding the aircraft within a couple hundred yards of where we thought it would be.
No kidding.
Yeah, but I mean, and a lot of people don't know that Civil Air Patrol has defined it way beyond what FAA had.
Okay.
But right now, and cell phone forensics. We follow the cell phones and we follow the radar. So there are a lot of things that, particularly in your type of territory. Now, sometimes out here in the mountains, you know, you're over a mountain, so your cell phone's useless for all purposes. But if the ELT goes, you know, we can still get to that.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, but I think most people are not serious about survival. They haven't really ever seen a crashed airplane or dead people.
Yes.
And, it only takes one or two of those, and you go, yeah, I'll wear a vest with some stuff in it right now. And I think that's the helpful message.
Yeah. Yeah. And then surviving a crash too, understanding that I don't know if this works or not. I was sleeping when this happened, but what I try to teach people is, you know, how important you're a Navy pilot and how important briefing is, whether you brief your departure. And when the departure briefing, I handle as where I'm going to go when the engine quits every single time. And if it's off airport, I tell myself that I'm crashing. I don't say I'm landing, right? That's for the media. But if you say you're crashing, you get it in your mind that you're going to bend that airplane up. And if you're willing to take it that far, you can start making better decisions. But a lot of the accidents I've been around that I've seen, there about 20 years ago, I saw 2 fatals within a couple days. And both of them were engine failures where they tried to get to a suitable landing site and they lost control, you know, just 100 feet above the ground. And my crash really gave me confidence in the airframe. I mean, here I can wreck that thing and stop in a few hundred feet and it's survivable. And I think that's what, I don't know how you teach that. I mean, when you do have a real emergency and you have ground rush coming at you, and I know it's hard, but I think a good step is saying I'm going to crash, not saying I'm going to land.
Yeah, and one of our somewhat tongue-in-cheek is you fly the aircraft all the way into the crash.
Right,
Bob
Hoover.
You don't try to yank the nose up and miss the wire. You just gotta fly your airplane all the way into the crash.
Yeah.
The other thing about shoulder harnesses, I had a 210 for about 30 years, and we put over the shoulder harnesses. So we had 2 harnesses and a chest belt across, because I've known several guys who died when their head hit the yoke or the dashboard. So, you know, trying to keep it back with double, you know, if you ever look at a military pilot, their torso is all tucked into that seat. And that's, well, and I also landed aboard carrier, so I did not want to kiss the gun sight, as we said. And,
right.
And having those 2 straps across the shoulder does more. Then you get 2 bruises, but you don't, you know, you slide out of it, because that just one shoulder harness, you can come out of that pretty easy.
Right. And that's one thing nice about Cessnas. I can't get that in the Mooney, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Well,
but yeah, otherwise I would, believe me.
Yeah, all of those thoughts come to mind when you really know that there will be some crashes.
Yeah. Well, and one thing with my accident that was good was part of my my standard operating procedure. It's like muscle memory. Before I take the runway, right after my run up and I'm cleared to take off, and I've always done this, and I believe I did it on this flight. I was impaired, but I cinch up my seatbelt really tight, and that helped a lot. I think, you know, if I would have been loose in there, it could have been a lot worse. And you know, for me to understand how bad my impact was, because I wasn't really there. I just kind of woke up in there. But my cell phone I found, and it was an iPhone, but it was sitting on the seat and it flew and hit something so hard that it went to some weird air screen. So it wasn't even working. I couldn't use it. And, you know, you can drop phones all the time and they seem to work. So it was a violent deal. I'm glad I wasn't awake for it.
Well, that's the impact. People cannot imagine. I got rear-ended once, and I had a garage door opener on my visor, and I was looking around. Where'd the garage door open? Well, it went right out the back of the car. The back window was blown out, and that thing went right by my head and out the back. It was out in the road. Mm-hmm. So people cannot quite imagine hard impact. It's not something we'd like to imagine, but anything that's loose becomes a bullet, and it can do a lot of damage.
Yeah, and it's on my list. I don't know if any of you have a good source, but I would like to get some really good cargo straps, cargo net for my baggage compartment. And I haven't been able to find one yet, but.
Okay. Well,
But
thank you,
there's
Dan. Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
I was just gonna say, there's been plenty of accidents where people have been injured, quite bad or fatally by things flying around.
Yep. Well, Dan, thank you for sharing your story with us, and I'm glad that you're doing good today.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
I'd like to thank everybody who participated this evening and wish everybody well, and thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks
Dan.
again.
All right, we'll see you guys later.
Right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Dan.